Welcome back to the Cannes 2023 Parallel Challenge on Fantasy Film Ball. We are your hosts, Matt and Arnaud.
That means we are watching an equivalent film to all 21 competition titles at Cannes this year. So in this video, we'll be doing The Man Without a Past and Fallen Leaves by Finnish author Aki Kaurismäki.
We are going to be talking about Finland's most famous filmmaker. Aki Kaurismaki, very fun name to say, has been making films since the 1980s and first caught some international attention in 1989 for his mockumentary Leningrad Cowboys Go America, which seems to be kind of a This Is Spinal Tap style film. Since then, he's made quite a few films that have really resonated with a global audience, including La Vie de Bohème, Drifting Clouds, The Man Without a Past, Le Havre, and The Other Side of Hope, many of which are now featured in the Criterion Collection. His films often focus on themes of social justice, usually about refugees and the struggles and systemic oppressions they face when integrating into new cultures. His films are usually quite light, very charming, and they're usually shot with a very recognizable, idiosyncratic style, a lot of very low-key lighting, very sharp shadows, bright colors, and almost tableau-like framing. In some ways, I see a lot of similarities between him and Wes Anderson in the dollhouse, handmade style of their films, but of course, in Kaurismäki's work, it's not as whimsical or frivolous, it's much more humanist. Kaurismäki famously hates the Oscars. He's been submitted 4 times, and twice out of those 4 times, he has withdrawn his film from submission. When he was nominated in 2002 for The Man Without a Past, he actually boycotted the ceremony in protest. For our parallel film, we did choose The Man Without a Past from 2002. It won the Cannes Grand Prix, and of course was nominated for the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. So it's a film that we're both very interested in seeing, and definitely was the obvious choice for the Cannes Parallel Challenge.
And don't forget, that year it also won Actress and the Palme d'Or. So this is a triple awards threat from Cannes. So, The Man Without a Past definitely follows what you might consider a familiar premise. Man is beaten up so bad that he gets amnesia, and he can't remember anything, so he's forced to restart his life in a way. We've seen these kinds of stories before, but of course Kaurismäki takes this concept in a very interesting way. His approach to the premise is essentially not having a name, is more of a logistical and administrative nightmare than a kind of thrilling identity adventure. We have a character that is rebuilding his life, and it proves to be quite challenging, but love is always around the corner. Kaurismäki to me is basically, what if Wes Anderson actually gave a shit about social issues of real people in his country and made films about that? It's not a diss on Wes Anderson. I think his films are fine the way they are. It's just that he operates in like imagined worlds, whereas Kaurismäki makes real life look far-fetched, even if it's based in a lot of truth.
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I love Wes Anderson. He is one of my favorite directors of all time, but Aki Kaurismäki, despite making films that feel very similar in that dollhouse feeling, Kaurismäki is approaching them with a much more humanist point of view. He's talking about social issues, he's talking about real people, real human beings, and I adored this film. I'm a sucker for aesthetics, which is why I love Wes Anderson. This film gave me everything I wanted out of that sort of look and feel, out of the sound, out of the visuals, the music, while also delivering a thought-provoking parable about systemic injustice. I thought it was truly beautiful, truly moving.
Honestly, it surprises me that we're not talking about this guy or this film in particular a little bit more. It feels like the kind of thing that cinephiles would be discussing, like, oh yeah, there's this Finnish author. His films are like really fun and really like amusing and cool, even if they talk about serious things. I think that like this high concept story is the basis for all things that he really wants to say about people and systems in Finland. It has such an obvious pitch that it's easy for you to kind of, oh, let's see what this film is about. But he uses his pitch in a way where he can talk about the issues that he really actually cares about. There's a whole kind of series of scenes in this film around the middle where, you know, we have this character kind of starting to discover that he has an affinity with metalwork, which leads him to seek a job, but he can't because he doesn't have a name unless he can get a bank account. So he goes to the bank and tries to get a bank account without his name, but as he's at the bank, the bank gets robbed. Even if the robber gets away scot-free, jury, he's actually the one in trouble because people find it suspicious that he doesn't have a name, and therefore he might be implicated in the robbery in some weird way, even though he's not, and he's the one in the jail cell. There's all these kinds of like whimsical, wacky situations that, even if they're absurd and kind of ridiculous as you see them, there are so many simple pleasures in this film. He works his aesthetics to a T, and they're very precise and they're very pretty. There's a cute dog in this film whose name is Hannibal. That's great. The music is fantastic in this too. There's a really fantastic soundtrack. His films are beautiful. It's just a pleasure watching his work.
I'm really shocked that this film is so hard to find. This is such an accessible film. It's odd that we had to scour the deepest depths of the internet to find it. Criterion, if you're hearing this, which you're not, get on this. You've released other Kaurismäki films. Release The Man Without a Past. It deserves a proper release, and it deserves to be beloved by cinephiles.
With that said, this year's competition entry from Kaurismäki, Fallen Leaves, which once again follows characters in the lower/working classes of Finland, interacting in unusual ways and maybe finding love or companionship. Of note, this is the shortest film in competition at 82 minutes. It's from a director whose style is now pretty well known among cinephiles, and that is seen as kind of nothing new. This isn't a diss on Kaurismäki, it's just that, you look at all his posters and he's always using that same font with the yellow text. His style is very consistent among films. His style might have been a little bit more like groundbreaking or original in 2002. I would be willing to bet that the jury is not as excited to see his work. He's not on the Dardennes level of getting a prize every time he comes to Cannes. So I think this film gets nothing. It would need to really be his best film or a career-defining work for the jury to justify awarding this film and not something more notable.
At the same time, though, I don't think that he's that well known to the point where people would go into this saying, oh, it's just the same thing that he did last time. Maybe a few of the jury members will be really familiar with his works. I assume Ruben Östlund would be, both being from a Nordic nation. I think most of the other jury might just swoon over a film like this that talks about real topics but does it in that sort of whimsical, fantastic approach of Wes Anderson, which he very much parallels in many, many ways. I think it's possible, if this film is really good, that it wins something. I don't think it has to necessarily be his best film. It just has to strike the jury in the right way.
The jury might just think it's a little slight. At least that's what I'm kind of betting on it. But what you can bet on is that this will almost certainly be Finland's submission to the Oscars. Boycott or not, Finland usually submits Kaurismäki's work if it's notable enough in the film scene that year. Right now, we don't have any other notable films from Finland that we know of. Maybe this will change in the fall festivals, but I'm willing to bet that this will be Finland's submission this year.
And unless he withdraws his film again, I think it's very likely that we could see this get shortlisted, potentially even going to a nomination. But thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Cannes Parallel Challenge. Make sure you subscribe so you can keep watching the rest of our Cannes content on our way to figure out who our Palme d'Or is going to be. Thank you all so much for joining us.